Our next speaker is Lyra, co-chair of Chicago DSA, and Lyra also went on a DSA trip to Cuba in the fall. All right, thank you.
Start putting that there. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lyra. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the co-chairs of Chicago DSA. I want to start out by saying it is such a privilege and an honor to share this space with folks here who have been fighting to end the blockade for decades, and many scholars, many academics, many people who've really dedicated their lives to pushing for an end to this inhumane blockade. And so I come to just share my experience from a delegation and share from my experience in the fight, but I'm also here to learn and to listen from the many speakers who both already have spoken but are coming to speak soon after me. And so to start with, I want to start foregrounding my experience in Cuba this past October with the reality that is facing the Cuban people, which the speaker before me was so kind to fully lay out and to fully get into the weeds of it. When I was there in October, Cuba has a building crisis, right? They can't import concrete or anything. And so many buildings in downtown Havana have been crumbling, don't have adequate supports, are frailing because of the blockade. Trash, one thing the previous speaker noted was trash pickup, has really started to slip because they do not have any fuel. And so you go there and there's a lot of trash and empty fields. There was actually a heartbreaking scene when we were on a bus passing just this corner. There were two 12-year-old boys just coming out to this empty field to empty out the trash because there's no trash pickup because of the blockade. The Cuban peso has taken a really big hit, and that's created many societal problems. The government wage is about $25 for a month, and that is roughly around the salary that you get as a doctor. As such, there's a shortage with doctors right now because you can make a lot more money in the service industry that has foreign currency than you can being a doctor in Cuba at the moment. And then, much like what was said previously, there are supply shortages with healthcare. Many of the medical equipment that has any American parts is banned from going into Cuba, and so they have a really big shortage of medicine and medical equipment needed to take care of their population. The last thing I'll note is that electricity and maintaining frequent electricity is really bad right now, which is affecting healthcare, it's affecting education, it's affecting all sorts of civil life within society. There was a really heartfelt moment where a Cuban journalist came to us and basically described the situation as such. Cubans, though never extremely wealthy, always had a baseline level of support, much thanks to the gains from the Cuban Revolution. And so things that you would see in other global South countries, that level of destitution was never as bad in Cuba because the government always tried to do what it could to maintain a basic standard of living. That is now starting to slip, and to slip really bad. And the types of poverty that you would see in other areas of global South is now affecting the Cuban people very harshly. And this was all the situation back in October, before the illegal kidnapping of Maduro, before the blocking of Venezuelan oil, before the executive order this week to further ban countries from helping the situation, such as what Mexico has done. And I can only imagine how much worse the situation is. I wanted to start by foregrounding many of the issues that are facing Cuba, inflicted upon by our own government, because although things are very bad, that wasn't the full takeaway that I had from the trip. For me, one of the most shocking things about Cuba wasn't the problems that ails its society today. The most shocking thing for me as an American was seeing a society that centers human being and human well-being over that of shareholder gain. While in Cuba, we visited three main places that I'd like to highlight. The first trip that we had visited was one of the major hospitals in Havana. And as many people know, Cuba is famous for its type of healthcare. We learned of the brigades that they sent. They're still sending brigades to other countries. They're still sending doctors out to help other countries, specifically within Latin America. We learned that everyone gets covered in Cuba, that there is universal health care there. We also learned that at the start of the revolution, that they sent doctors all throughout the entire country to survey the needs of the people, including in rural areas which had far been neglected. And we also learned that they set a very comprehensive primary system, one that has primary healthcare at the neighborhood level. So the Cuban people enjoy access to screenings and preventative care at a much greater detail than Americans do, in fact. The second area that I want to highlight was the academies of the Latin American School of Medicine. So not only does Cuba export its doctors to the rest of Latin America and the global South, it teaches their people free of cost. And one thing that I really wanted to highlight here was a very beautiful speech by one of the professors there, where in talking about how they don't charge the countries that students come from, he was like, they share what we have. And so we share our supplies, we share our medicine, we share our teachings. And in return, the students share the struggles. They share the food quality, they share the frequent power outages, and they share sometimes the hard access to water. And he recanted that there was a period of time that was 20 days where the academy was without fresh water, and students were having clean water pipes imported in. And the students took it amongst themselves to distribute the clean water pipes equitably amongst each of the students' community. I thought that was a very beautiful story. And the last place in this trip that I wanted to take you all was a place called Cinesex, which is Cuba's, I have the exact acronym here, but it's basically Cuba's sex education center. And outside of sex education, they also do advocacy. This place is awesome, y'all. They teach people, they provide comprehensive sex ed to both children and to families. They teach against domestic abuse. They provide a lot of resources and support for queer people. As a trans person, it was very great to see all the services they provide for trans people in terms of counseling, in terms of pre-surgery care, the whole nine. And they were one of the main drivers behind the revamp of the Cuba Family Code, which legalized gay marriage, recognized different family structures, one of the most progressive family codes in the world. And for a lot of us who were trans on that trip, that was one of the highlights of the trip, because we are told to fear this island of people. We are told that these people are terrorists and are criminals. Yet many of us felt far safer in Havana than we did going through the Miami airport to get there. And so that trip brought most of us to tears, because as trans people in the United States, it was shocking to see that there was another way. You know, you could have a government that didn't just despise you, that didn't want to eradicate you, that didn't want to tell you that your existence was disgusting or invalid, but that actually acknowledged you as a human being and provided you care. And so one of the things that I will end with is the danger of Cuba isn't drugs, isn't terrorism, isn't of the heinous lies of this fascist administration. The danger is that Cuba shows a model that a better world is possible, and that is by far the biggest threat to the American empire and the biggest threat to the Trump regime. And so, thank you. And so I wanted to end with one of the main lessons, and one of the things I took to heart was that it truly is on many of us as Americans to fight this regime as hard as possible. And we have an outsized responsibility here to make sure that we end the blockade and we end the embargo, and that we take the resilience and the beauty and the strength of the Cuban people in the face of all of this hell that our country is giving to them. And we take that fight with us as we face the administration here. And so that's whether resisting ICE and keeping that resilience alive when we're fighting ICE in the streets. That's whether we're all collectively, withholding our labor like they did in Minneapolis. That's like all of our strategies to beat back the administration, both in the halls of Congress or on the streets. And so what's kept me going these days is just remembering just how resilient and beautiful they've been, and taking that beauty with me in all of my organizing. Thank you all.